So, welcome to Bloom. Be inspired to be the best version of yourself and make a positive impact for meaningful change in the world. And I have a guest today that I'm really, really happy that he agreed to be on my show. And we actually met by serendipity because Oumar Dieng is the person that very kindly agreed to do the technical work on my podcasts. So that is how we met. And then we found out that there are actually quite a lot of parallels in our lives and the way we see the world. So I really, really wanted him to be on my show. And yes, what to tell about Oumar? There's actually a lot. And I try to pick and choose a little bit. So Oumar himself has, I think, at least one, if not two, podcasts himself. And so one is called the Motivational Voice podcast. And he's a life and career coach, a motivational speaker. He held many seminars. He's written books. He's appeared on TV. And I think my favorite one, apart from the TED Talk he held last year, is that you, Oumar, won a poetry award when you were only 16 years old. That really impressed me, I can tell you that. And yeah, there's lots and lots and lots of things to cover. But as usual, I want to also give you Oumar's motto, which is very dear to my heart, actually. It's called Empowering Minds, Inspiring Change. So that already sets the stage for what we're going to talk about. Oumar, you are originally from Africa, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. You grew up in Mauritania, which is, for people that don't know Africa very well, it's just north of Senegal. And Senegal will also play a role probably in this talk because your family is originally from there. And this is important because you now live in the US, and I think I would call you a traveler of different worlds, which made you very resilient. And that is one of the main topics you talk about and you support people with. And the groundwork of that mission of empowering minds and inspiring change was actually laid very early in your biography. And let's talk about that a little bit. So over to you. And anything I forgot, please add.
No, first of all, Yole, thank you for having me on the podcast. I look forward to our conversation. Thank you for the introduction as well.
You're most welcome. So let's talk a little bit about your early biography, because there is, so much in there that shaped you. And I'd also like to go, we had a little discussion about that just before we started the podcast, on how many languages you actually speak. And, that is actually something we also share. It's not necessarily the same languages, but this ability to travel different mindsets, to travel different worlds, also in that sense. So I'll just hand that over to you.
All right. Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much, as I said. And yes, I think languages were basically something that has always been in my life. I as you said, I grew up in Mauritania. I was born there due to the fact that my parents, my dad and my mom and dad moved there in the 60s. And then I was born there in the 70s. And so growing up in a society like that, I was already speaking in the family. We were speaking one language, from my mom, one from my dad, one from the streets, if you will, the local native language. Hassania at the time it's called. It's a derivative of Arabic, basically, like a dialect of Arabic. And I spoke Wolof and Pular, which were languages that are spoken in West Africa, but primarily from Senegal. And so languages were crucial because and of course there was French, which was the official language of the country at the time. So right off the bat, boom, you grow up and you're speaking, or at least hearing 3, 4, 5 languages. And that really does something really crucial because it allows you to expand your mind and to see the world from several cultural lenses because each language is unique. And that I think was really crucial to who I became later on in life. So science has shown that if you speak different languages, it literally triggers and activates different parts of your brain, and that actually allows you to expand your mind quite literally. And
Yeah,
that's
literally.
yeah, so that's really where things started for me in terms of at least languages.
I would also say, in a way, um, that also expands your emotions, not just the way you
Mhm.
think. I mean, let's say in my case, half German, half Italian, there is a scope of emotions that I'm willing to go to that probably most people from the one or the other country are not. And it is such an essential thing because Oumar is also a highly sensitive person, as you might have guessed, him being on the show. Um, it creates even more worlds emotionally that we can travel to and that we can share with other people and pick up from other people. So your radar, is much bigger than that of somebody who just grew up in one country.
Yeah, yeah, I would say that, and you and I talked about this before, I think prior to hitting record, which is when you speak different languages, you're picking up those cultural nuances, and that has an influence on us, right? The more languages you speak, the more cultures you're exposed to, and really the more tools, if you will, you pick up from those cultures in terms of how to deal with an issue or with something, or how to address, how to move forward in life, because different cultures deal with things differently, as we know, and that really makes you a lot more resilient, right? So, and I've never officially been diagnosed as a highly sensitive individual. However, early on in life, I noticed that I I chose to live my early life as an observer, if you will, where
Mm-hmm.
I was seen as highly intelligent, but I observed a lot. I wouldn't necessarily engage. I was very introverted and needed time to be creative, writing poetry and such. But I noticed that I did a lot better, and I that by observing, essentially. So I would hang out with my friends, and they'll be doing things, and they will try to fix a problem, and I'll just hang back and watch and observe, what have they tried and what hasn't worked and those things. And all of a sudden I'll get up and say, hey, why don't we do this? And they'll try it and it will work. I'm like, dude, why didn't you get up earlier and say something? I'm like, because I wasn't ready yet, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, so yeah,
But
there's a lot of power in
mm,
in in acknowledging those different nuances in the culture, in the language, that can actually really make you a better person, or at least give you the right tools, or a different set of tools to tackle problems, challenges in life, right?
mm, yeah, it certainly does. And I like that nugget that you put in there, that, that mixture of high intelligence and high sensitivity is a very, it's a very profound one, actually. Yeah, because it makes the complexity that you can see and the depth that you're willing to go to is even bigger. And I like this element that you said, sometimes it takes longer, and it doesn't take you longer because you're not smart. It takes you longer because you want to see more parts of it, and because you want to understand the complexity of it rather than jumping to very quick conclusions about something. So many, highly sensitives or highly sensitives that are very intelligent sometimes at school get labeled as stupid or as, behind, or they don't talk, but people don't realize what's actually happening in that brain. And you have the same thing in business meetings, and people that just take a bit longer because they have so much data to connect. Exactly. And people say, why are you so slow? But then when you come up with, hey, dude, why didn't you say that before? And you say, because I couldn't, because, I needed
Yeah.
to compute all these things.
Yeah, that's a very good observation, Yoli. I was watching movie not too long ago, a recent movie, Killers of the Flower Moon. I
Mm.
think Steven Spielberg directed it, about the African American, not the African American, the Indian American community, the Native American, I should say, community. And there was a scene in there where one of the main characters was talking to a male character, and she's female, Native Indian American female. And then he was just talking and talking. He was like, just sit there, be quiet, just listen to the rain falling. You know,
Exactly.
you don't have to talk, just enjoy. He was like, oh, but, and then he was quiet for a second, and then you could see him in the scene kind of relax, and just perhaps for the first time in a long time, taking a moment to just appreciate the rain falling and the different sounds and the wind and so on. So to bring that back quickly to your point, it some people don't take the time to just stop and think before reacting. You don't have to answer immediately. You don't have to solve a problem immediately. You can take a second, think about it, process the data, as you would say,
Yeah.
and then react.
Mm, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I like that. I like that. So I think in I leave that up to you, whether you want to talk about this incident, that really shaped your life at this point or later. So, we're talking here, this podcast is about leadership, it's about resiliency. And to me, it seems like that was one of the starting points where that was set off basically as something that you understood is essential to survive, actually, and to thrive. I think you understood that later in life, but so
Yeah. Yeah, I can certainly. I think yeah, what you're referring to is when I was 15 or 16 years old, I spent time in a refugee camp, but that happened because essentially we had, at a time when I was living back in Mauritania, we had a mob come to our door and try to break the door down. This is essentially a very deadly mob. They had weapons and they wanted to come in the house. Um, but long story short, my sister and I at the time were able to walk up to the door and convince this mob to walk away by speaking the local language, Hassania. And we cracked the door open a little bit. My sister was holding the door. She's a few years older than I was, and between her and I, we were speaking to say, hey, no, we are Mauritanians, which is true. I was born in Mauritania, so
Mhm.
a dual nationality, Mauritanian and then Senegalese. And we live here. We are from here. We're not Senegalese. We told them that we weren't, so they wouldn't come in and kill everyone. And
Mm.
by the grace of God, we managed to convince them to walk away. And glad we did that, because they were going to come in, and we were hiding some of our neighbors, some of our Senegalese neighbors,
Gosh.
because at the time, for several days, they were kind of going in the neighborhood and killing, anyone who they thought or who identified as a Senegalese, they were killing literally. And we were hiding some of those folks in our house. And had they come in, whether we were Mauritanians or not, they would have massacred everyone. So we convinced them to walk away. And eventually, of course, that led to my family fleeing to Senegal, and really kind of starting the process of a very long and arduous experience, because in the process of fleeing the country, my sisters went ahead, and before my mom and I, and then my mom and I stayed behind
Mm.
for a while, because ridiculously, now that I look back, I wanted to stay and finish my last semester of school at the time. So because one of my best friends was also staying back,
Mhm.
of course, in hindsight, that's
Yeah, that's
ridiculous now.
yeah.
But as a teenager at the time, I was like, no, I got to finish school. I got to keep my grades
Mm.
up. I had pretty good grades at the time. But anyway, we ended up leaving our house, and we went to live with one of her friends' houses. But then my mom was going back and forth every once in a while to check on the house to make sure that it wasn't looted. One day she she left, after didn't come back after curfew, and then she was picked up by the MPs. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. So all of a sudden, I ended up alone in a country that was trying to kill me, and I
Oh,
ended up having to, be sent to a refugee camp where I had some interesting experiences and learned, in hindsight, quite a bit about resilience and what it takes to tackle life. And we can certainly dig into that.
yeah, I'd love to, because it really impressed me. If I remember correctly, it was about water and, food, and, about the power of people who are famished and thirsty. And
Yeah, yeah. There was an experience that happened in the camp. It's a camp that was designed to hold maybe a couple hundred people tops, but so many people were going to the camp where it had thousands of people, and every single spot in the camp was really occupied by people, men, women, children, and of course we had to be fed, right? Because we didn't have anything. We just had the clothes on our backs in the camp. So when food came in, there's this one experience that I talk about in my TEDx talk where a food truck drove in and stopped in the middle of the camp, and all of a sudden people just stormed the truck and surrounded it. And that was the first day I was there. I was trying to get food, and if you've ever had the experience of being in a crowd and feeling trampled or crushed and you can't breathe and all of a sudden you're panicking, that's what it felt like. And I realized that, um, if I didn't find a way to find allies in that camp, I would not survive that camp. Not to mention trying to get back with my relatives. So I allied myself with four adults who were, and I mentioned they were stronger, they were faster, to pull our resources together and actually find a way to find food. And that's when I started actually to be, comfortable is not the right word in a refugee camp, but to be at least to eat and drink more frequently than had I not done that. So
yeah, and not to feel so alone as well. So
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
still to have
And I
some,
mean,
to still have some sort of community around you.
yeah, exactly. And I think the nice thing about the camp, though, was nice thing is relative. But w- when we found ourselves in the camp, by we, I mean every refugee who was in there, we found ways to kind of humanize the experience, right? So because we had babies born there, we had, so we made it a community where we created these relationships, and more you would see groups of people who were doing the same thing we were doing, kind of pulling resources and helping each other rather than making it a, every man or every woman for himself or herself, right? So there was that community, and that actually I think made things a little more sane for a lot of us, because we realized, okay, we have a lot of other people here who are going through the same thing. We can look at that and make the best of it to survive this.
I think you mentioned something really, really important here, and that's why I think it laid the groundwork for what you're doing now. Um, and that is, you know, the stage was basically set for a lot of trauma, and you probably do carry trauma. I mean, but because of how it happened, with your ability to speak the language, to let me sing Hisania, it was right, Hisania.
Asania, yes.
Hisania. So you were able to help yourself. You weren't helpless in that situation, and you survived, and the people that were hiding in your house survived, and then you went to that camp and you took a decision, and other people took a decision to make the situation more bearable, more humane, more manageable, which I think does something on how much the trauma affects you. And I think taught you a lot about how very difficult situations can be not just survived, but also survived with a certain sense of possibility.
Yes.
So I would like to tie that in with your work, obviously, and what you your definition of an empowerment is on, based on what you've been through. And also I'd like to talk a little bit about your concept of leadership within your frame, because you talk about that as well in your work. So maybe we can take that and now transport it to 2023 and the work you do now, and where you got to from the refugee camp to being a successful businessman, happily married with children, non-traumatized. I mean, that is quite a feat. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And I think one thing that happened in the camp with this whole experience is that in hindsight, it really taught me what I do today. I work a lot with the concept of resilience, right? So I have this program, if you will, where it's based on what I call some core pillars of resilience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things like I have a program called F.R.A.M.S, right? F.R.A.M.S, and where each of those letters stands for something. And it goes to the core of what makes a person resilient to be able to overcome obstacles, regardless of the magnitude of the obstacle, right? And what I found in hindsight was that there were a few things. There was a flexibility. There were rituals that I did. There were what I call anchor memories. There were also, what I would call micro resilience events, and of course the support aspect of it. So the so to just talk about very briefly about some of that, I think one
Yeah,
of the
please.
ones is flexibility, which is
Mm.
essential to being resilient and being able to overcome obstacles and challenges in life. Because, and I like to tell the story of what in the French education system we were taught about a fable from Jean de La Fontaine, a French writer and author and poet, and he tells the story of an oak tree and a reed. A reed is a very fine, long-stemmed weed that's very, very flexible. That's also very light. So the story goes that there was a very big storm that happened, and the oak tree was thousands of years old and would make fun of the reed, saying that every time there's a gust of wind, you're balancing like crazy. You're going left and right. You're bobbing about the wind, kind of mocking the reed. But then one day a hurricane came, and the the oak tree that had survived for hundreds of years was able to do the same thing that it did in the past, meaning remain strong and stoic and stand straight to the wind. But the reed was kind of flopping back and forth, being very flexible to the wind, being beaten up essentially. But then the oak tree got uprooted, right? And the story there goes that if you think about it, that happens to us in life, where we will face challenges, and depending on how we react to that challenge or obstacle, we can break, not necessarily break in half, but it could break us emotionally. It could overwhelm us. And flexibility is a key aspect in that you have to understand that things around you change, and you have to find a way to embrace it, maybe in your own way, but you have to embrace those changes and actually to be able to survive some of those harder, rougher events that happen in
Absolutely.
your life. Right.
Yeah.
So that's one of the aspects of it.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I mean, we can dig deeper into the frame if you like, into these also what you call the micro resilience events,
Right.
and those 5 pillars. So you mentioned flexibility. Of course, I find as an anthropologist, I find simply the word rituals already very enticing.
Right.
Then you have anchor memories and 2 others. So it might be very interesting for our listeners to, for you to take us there. I would just like to first ask you a question, and because I forgot that, and that is, that high sensitivity, that intelligence, would you say that was in those situations was a gift, or was it a problem, or was it maybe both? Could
I
you?
think it was a gift in that most people would, in certain situations, just react. And yes, sometimes that calls for that. You have to react quickly to be able to take advantage of a certain situation or even
Mm.
address it properly and survive, right? So if a lion is coming around the corner, you don't want to stand there thinking about how you're going to react, right? You want to just react. But in most situations, I would say in our modern society, the challenges that we face are not so life-threatening that you have to react immediately, right? You can take a moment and think about it and weigh your options, right? So it's a whole example, and I talk about sometimes some clients about this, which is what happens a lot is if you're driving in traffic and someone cuts in front of you, what do you do? 99% of the time, even if you're a good person, and most people would just react and maybe send a curse word or give them a finger, but that may not even be you. But because you are reacting immediately to something that, if you think about it, is ridiculous because you don't own the road, right? I don't own the road, right? We all share it. But if you just count to 5 or even 10, you will find yourself that you let them in, right? So going back to your question, yes, it's a blessing in that I was able to take the time and think about the situation when I was almost crushed to death. I took a step back and I said, okay, what can I do to actually survive this camp? I can't beat all of these people. I was a very skinny kid, probably maybe 140, less than that, pounds at the time, very skinny. And I thought about it, and my solution was to observe people who were grabbing a lot of food and running on their own, and then I approached them with a proposal, which they accepted, right? So yeah, it was
And
a blessing.
you did not get, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And you managed, and I want to make that point because so many times high sensitivity is reduced to that overwhelm. You managed to do that even though it was an emotionally and a nervous system overwhelm. So there must have been something in the way you grew up that made you already resilient, even though as a highly sensitive person we have less filters to all of these things. When we grow up in an environment where that is not constantly triggered, we can actually be quite capable of doing what you did. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I had a good role model in my dad who passed away early. Actually, he passed away in his 50s. But one thing he did very well is, and I say it was as if he knew that he was going to pass away
Mm.
early, because he would talk to me like he would an adult. He would tell me stories of people, whether it was in history or in a holy book or in his experiences and how he reacted, right? And he infused kindness and patience and moderation in that.
Mm.
And what I learned from that was whatever you do, do it with kindness, do it with moderation, do it with tact. Think about it before you react. And sometimes that may mean, maybe you shut down. Okay, that's fine. Shut down, reboot, if you will. Think
Mm.
about your thoughts, think about what you can control versus what you can't. And it's a little more complicated than that, but in a nutshell, if you do that, it gives you a reset point to say, okay, if I react this way, what is this going to do to my system? What is this going to do to me? And is it going to incapacitate me to the point that I can't, go on, right? In a situation where you have to go on, right? So that helped a lot,
Yeah,
in
I'm
terms of
sure it
giving me the
did.
background.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. And that is an incredible skill to have, um, in order to avoid being inundated with overwhelm. So that is self-care. It's a very, very
Yeah.
good um, example of self-care. So I like that a lot. So thank you for explaining a bit more about this. So what do you think? Shall we go back? I mean, there are two more questions I have, but I'd really like to go back to those 5 pillars because I think that would be very useful. You have a very, very interesting concept there.
Sure. Yeah, I can touch into each of those pillars. The one of the pillars is I call it rituals, right? Because when I went back and looked at my youth things that really brought me peace and joy and balance. And then I compared that to my situation in the camp. Things that actually helped was when I was in the camp after I met these guys and we kind of formed a group. One thing we did religiously was, outside of praying, of course, because um, we prayed regularly on the camp. We had a lot of time on our hands. So I'm Muslim of background. So, Muslims pray five times a day, which it's just a type of meditation if you think about it, right? So some people meditate, some people practice mindfulness, but essentially all of them come down to one thing. You are isolating everything around you to focus on one thing, one thought, and one concept, and you are adding maybe some physical practices along with it, right? So prayer, you're getting up and down. If you're a Christian, you are at the altar, you're putting your hands together, you're nodding, you're kind of bowing your head. There are some physical components that you do, but all of this is a ritual, and your body is basically slowed down, and your thoughts to the point that you can actually focus on what's important, which is essentially you, right? So we used to have tea in Senegal and Mauritania. They have tea much like most countries every day, and we would have tea, and just the ritual around the tea ceremony itself is you have 3 cups of tea that you serve at different intervals, and you talk about life, you share funny stories. So what it does, it takes you out of that moment and brings you to what's possible, right? Where you can imagine a future where you are at peace, you see what you want. So just to keep it short, that was one ritual that really helped me kind of survive the camp, if you will. But taking it outside of the camp, right? Some of the things that I do is, I might go on a jog, I might do some reading, I might play a sport, or just do something that keeps me on a regular basis connected to the things that I love to do, to a ritual essentially, right? So that replenishes you and actually gives you the balance you need to actually reconnect with your purpose. And when you lose connection with what your purpose is, and that happens when you don't think about it a lot, meaning you don't take those times to have that ritual, then you feel lost.
Yeah, and when you feel lost, overwhelm is usually very close nearby.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're basically saying, that is like a trajectory that helps you to, in a way, also insulate against things that then are not important. You don't have to deal with them. So
Exactly.
yeah, you're not constantly, you mentioned that you're not constantly reacting to something, you're not constantly engaging into something, you're prioritizing returning what I call to center.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And I know in HSPs, and you need that, right? You need to be able to be with your own thoughts and feelings and process them. Otherwise, you'll just be overwhelmed to the point that it will negatively affect your well-being.
Yeah, definitely. So the third one is anchor memories.
Yes, and anchor memories. This is something.
Briefly. Yeah.
Yeah, briefly, anchor memories is basically when you are facing a situation where it's challenging and you are feeling a certain way. There is a visualization essentially that I do where I look back in my life at some of the best memories that actually made me happy or inspired about something. And by doing that visualization, you add one component. Don't just visualize it. So, for example, a memory I had of my dad and being very happy with him and his warmth around me. Not only thinking about the memory, but the emotions that are tied to that memory. So, what did I feel? Security. What did I feel? His warmth and his strength and his voice kind of thundering, and bring those emotions to the present to replace the negative emotion that you might be feeling. Could be overwhelmed, could be stress, could be anything, and try to replace it with that emotion. And that's a very quick way to kind of try to change your emotions and actually control them in a way that's productive. So hence anchor memories. You're looking at a memory that's important to you in your life and use that memory as an anchor.
So that is great help for our listeners who might be looking for some guidance on how to navigate challenges. So there are two more. You said 5. You're on number 3.
Yeah,
So 4 and 5.
number 4, it would be what I call micro resilience events. And
Mm-hmm.
what that is think about, sometimes when we face a challenge, we look at it, we're like, okay, there's no way I can do this. I'm going to find another way. I'm just going to give up, right? But when you think about the things that you've done in your life, and it doesn't have to be today, it could be from the past, right? The first time you were learning to ride a bicycle, your first heartbreak, maybe you went through divorce, maybe you survived cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you know someone in your family, close family, who overcame something that you thought was unthinkable. But all of those things, if you take them separately on their own, they might seem meaningless, right? Except, if you survive cancer, that's a big deal. But learning to ride a bike, okay, meaningless. Everyone learns to ride a bike at some point. Alone, it seems meaningless. But if you add them all together, you realize, wait a minute, I have survived decades of stuff, right? So those events, those micro events, if you add them up all together, you realize that you have it within you. You have a superpower within you to actually combine all of those learnings that you got from riding the bike, surviving this or that, your first heartbreak, so on. It
Mm-hmm.
gives you really the strength to overcome, most challenges, because then you are giving yourself the emotional resilience to say, wait a minute, I can do this. I've done it thousands of times before, right?
Yeah,
So
that aspect of self-love as well.
exactly.
Yeah.
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 So, and number 5.
Yeah, number 5 is what I call the village effect, which essentially is support, having a
Mm-hmm.
support system,
Mm-hmm.
right? We live in a society where it's very individualistic, at least, here in America, in part of the Western world, where we want to do things by ourselves. We're 18, we move out and we do it by ourselves because we are our own man or woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you look back and realize everything you did, from the time that you were learning to walk and falling and your parents picking you up and giving you guidance and giving you a kiss, to, people who helped you overcome challenges in high school and in your career, and challenges you had in life, and the friends that supported you to even now. You need a support system around you, because there are some challenges that no one would ever be able to take on their own. But as a community, if you have the help, you will be able to overcome those challenges because you're not alone. And if it takes you 10,000 hours to do something, it might take 10 people a lot less time to do it, right? So you need that community. You need, even if it's one friend as a confidant, or
Mm-hmm.
a group of people you go to play sports or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever kind of makes you happy. You need that community.
Yeah, and highly sensitives need it even more than other neurotypical people, even though, also the science is very clear. We thrive in community, all of us. But
Exactly.
for us, it's even more important because it's something we really crave, that really makes us regulate our nervous system and makes us feel safe if we have the right community also to that's also something that brought you and I into the discussion, because we have so many similar things, and that
Yeah.
and similar goals and similar thoughts and similar ideas on missions, in a way that already is a community, even though you live in the US and I'm over here in Europe.
Yeah,
But it's just,
absolutely.
yeah, it's just a good feeling to know there's another soul somewhere that has a similar setup. Let's call it that way.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Yole, because when we think about community, we think about people around us. And you're right, that's not necessarily true. It could mean like-minded people, people who share the same beliefs or are look after the same goals. That's also a very important piece, because they will support you more so than sometimes even your family and friends.
Definitely. Even though I like to call it like-hearted, not like,
Right.
maybe both.
Yeah.
Um, there is something I wanted to address, because I think we still have a little bit of time, that um, might also be useful to this community. And you can talk about this a lot better than I could. And so that is the perspective of being highly sensitive, from the perspective of being a Black male person. We had talked about that before, that carries in itself specific challenges, maybe also gifts. I don't know. I mean, you would know much better. And within that, I remember we talked about, growing up and being in Africa, and where the white person is the odd one out, and then moving to the States where suddenly you found yourself being, not the majority of people. And, like I told you, I remember I was in Africa for 6 weeks in Kenya, and not just in a hotel, but I mean, really immersed, because we were also doing research on a farm. And I remember this odd feeling of suddenly be the white woman, the odd one out. So, you know,
Yeah.
let's expand a little bit on that, and and how that actually maybe shapes that return to self.
Yeah. Yeah, you good point. And my wife talks about this because she lived in Senegal at one point, and she's white.
Mm-hmm.
And she had the same experience where she was from America, where she was the minority. All of a sudden, she finds herself, very black, country of Senegal, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I went from being my majority to minority." And with that, to your point, that comes, especially being a woman, that comes with experiences where, some might be pleasant, some might be unpleasant, and it gives you, I guess, a seat, front row seat to what maybe minorities experience, and perhaps even opens your eyes to a little more compassion and understanding,
Definitely.
than most people would have, right?
Mm.
So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, to answer your question, I, I'm going to start with a just 10-second story here, which is I have a sibling, an older sibling. He's the oldest of our families, and when he was growing up, he had polio and was not able to walk until the age of 13, right? And but he was a man, and having grown up in Africa, he was supposed to be a man, and he was also illiterate, right? And he liked to in hindsight, I think he's probably an HSP as
Mm.
well, because he never went to school, but he likes to take things apart. Like my dad would come home and be like, "Wait, what happened to the radio?" And he would have taken it apart into pieces and trying to put it back together. So he was
Oh,
always trying to
great.
get in touch
Wow.
with his sensitivities and with his,
Mm-hmm.
love of technology, right? But the point I'm trying to make there is that there is a certain propensity towards trying to be, especially if you're a man, a black man, trying to to rise up to the occasion, right? To because of maybe gender roles or perception, right? A man should be strong and protect his family. And if you have any type of atypical personality or diagnosis or whatever it may be, you are not strong enough. You are weak, right?
Mm.
So you will see quite often in the African and the African American community that any type of atypicalness, or even in some cases mental illness, and of course HSPs, is seen as it's hidden, right? You don't see it quite a bit, because it's seen as a stigma that a man should be strong. What do you mean you have to take time and be by yourself? What that's not strong is the perception, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right, because as a man, you have to be at the center of everything and be in control and protect, your families and so on. So that's why that's one of the core challenges in the Black community, where you will see that people will not show that they are different because of that, because they already have so much to deal with. Um, but also the for the African American community, and being a Black man and dealing with any type of difference, you have to prove that you are worthy. You have to prove that you are just as capable as anyone else.
Mm.
And you also have to stack everything else on top of that, whatever challenges you may be facing. Plus, if you're the minority in a country that's a majority, white, or that can be a challenge, right? Because a difference can be seen as a weakness because of your race, rather than no, this is how your brain is constructed, and this is who you are, right?
Exactly, no
So
matter what the color of your skin is. Yeah.
exactly. And in some cases, I mean, no matter of the color of your skin, if you have any type of difference, that's already an issue. So if you add on top of that, that, of course, in more so in America, that there's been a history of, I mean, that of, of challenges for Africans. But um, Black men generally tend to be more protective of their mental health, of their differences, because of that, the fact that they have to rise up to be a man, and not bring it up, right? But of course, that is changing with perception now. We have a lot of celebrities coming out, and in fact, people don't know, they may not know this, but the biggest celebrity HSP is actually Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah, but I believe that anytime. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was an HSP,
Mm.
and look at the things that he was able to do, right? So, but because he was willing to challenge the status quo and say, you know what, because I'm different, even though he didn't talk about it a lot, because I'm different, I'm still gonna achieve and push the boundaries of what people think is possible, right? And and race not included, if you take that out of the equation, the ability of a man to have what some see as a challenge and actually be able to thrive like that and change the course of history of a country and even the world, is an inspiration to anyone who's looking to actually push beyond what they may perceive as a limitation, right?
Yeah.
So
So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that, because we actually did forget to talk about leadership, but there it is.
right, yeah, exactly,
That
yeah, and
that's
that's
where
the
it
key.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's
And
that
I'm
specific.
I was just going to quickly add that, and I'm happy to see that there's a lot of more celebrities that come out and talk about that. Like you have Jay-Z, and you have Jada Pinkett Smith, you have even Janet Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
who come out and talk about people who have differences, and specifically they were talking about mental health, should not be stigmatized but embraced, because look at what those people are doing, and how popular they are. So
How was that for you? I mean, that picture that you drew of, um, the kind of man you were supposed to be. How does the poetry fit in there? I'm intrigued. And you did it at a very early age. So
yeah, yeah, for me, um, poetry and writing was an outlet.
mm,
So I would write poetry and try to be creative, and that was really a way for me to not only master the language. I was first writing in French, and of course I went on to write poetry in English as well. But it allowed
I
me
love.
to be creative. It allowed me to also, it was a bit therapeutic as well,
Mm,
because as I mentioned, my dad passed away when I was 11 at the time, and I started writing, and that helped a lot, kind of channel my emotions. And I could be angry on paper and write whatever I wanted to write, and without having anyone judge me, and it was therapeutic to me, right? And at the time, I also didn't know who to turn to, because in Africa, and in the you don't have a lot of the therapists and
yeah.
doctors that you can go to, and you never see someone who would actually see a therapist. At least in my generation, now it's a little bit different, but it's still there, where people don't talk about their feelings or emotions or their mental health, or even seeking help. So poetry for me and writing really helped channel those emotions into paper, and what was very healing to me.
And
So
were you challenged in your maleness because you did that? Because that's, in a way, I mean, I love the fact that you explained what it did for you, and that that is a way not just for a woman but also for a man to, to heal and to feel actually what's going on inside rather than pushing it away. But did it challenge? Was it a challenge to say I'm a man who writes poetry? Was that considered sissy, or it's
no,
culturally very different, in every country? So
yeah, yeah. In my immediate circles, my family, they found that to be interesting, and they didn't challenge me on that. I started writing when I was in Mauritania. When I went to Senegal, uh, some people certainly looked at it as weird, but didn't challenge me on it. And I had a good group of friends that thought, oh, that's just Oumar, that's what he does, right? And what helped solidify that as not being weird was the fact that I had taken part in a poetry competition, as you mentioned earlier on, and it was a national poetry competition, and I took third place. And all of a sudden that legitimized not only my you could say my control and my mastery of the French language at the time, but also that, wait a minute, this is not worthless, because there was a trophy, and there was a little bit of a prize money that was tied to that. And I was living with my uncle at the time, and he was very proud of me for having achieved that goal. And to me, that was really reassuring and solidified that writing and in some cases journaling, even for emotional support, can be very powerful, regardless of what people say about it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I like that a lot. So unfortunately, I mean, we would have plenty of other things to talk about. We need to start wrapping it up. And as you know, there's always a last question. And that is, what did I not ask you or not mention that you would, think is important to sort of say for the community?
Yeah, I would say we all face challenges at some point in our lives, and you have to understand, and you have to be willing to take on your own journey, right? What works for you. So I'm hoping that some of the things that you already talked about here and I talked about will actually expand your mind into what's possible. And that, but what it comes down to is what works for you. What do you think actually brings you joy and helps you overcome those challenges? And then just do that, right? And you don't have to do everything. You just have to find one thing that works for you and do that and be consistent with that.
Yeah, because that's what you did, and look where you are. Yeah, I mean, really, I applaud you for that. I find that so impressive. And you followed
Thank
your
you.
heart, and you followed what your mission was. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so I thank you. Thank you. That is a very, very wonderful way of wrapping it up and saying, don't necessarily listen to all the chatter of you should and you ought, and this is done this way or that way. I think we are actually, if we start listening to ourselves and start having confidence in ourselves, as you very nicely described, we can actually do a lot. Take Martin Luther King. Yeah. Who didn't sit around whining about being a victim. He said, I've got something to do here, and I will. I will build
Exactly.
a community. I will say what I have to say. Unfortunately, he paid, the supreme price for it. But man, he left a legacy for all of us.
Yeah. Perfectly said.
So thank you very, very much, Oumar. And yeah, I'll see you on the other side.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.